Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this fourth session of the University Principal Preparation Initiative's e-learning series called Taking Educator Preparation to the Next Level. This five-part monthly learning series highlights research, best practices, and strategies aimed at improving educator preparation and specifically principal preparation. Revitalizing educator preparation is incredibly important, as you know. It's important to teachers and students because if we're able to reach our national goals around educational equity and achievement, this generation of school leader and the next generation will be the ones to move our educational systems. We're facing incredibly challenging times, and many of our challenges are unprecedented. Our school systems have experienced remarkable shocks borne by the national pandemic, and we're also finally coming to grips with concerns about social justice that have been pervasive in our governmental institutions for a long period of time. And I look toward the next generation and this generation of educational leader to find those solutions, to have those critical conversations with staff members, parents, and communities to improve the schools and provide the level of service we expect in public education. Because we know that education is the key to future economic and social growth for our kids. So this series really focuses on preparation programs. But we're looking at preparation programs as situated in a broader context through inter-organizational partnerships within universities and other institutions that support the preparation programs, and inter-organizational partnerships. Those are partnerships between preparation programs and with community-based organizations, school districts, and other organizations that help to support the preparation program in ensuring that they're preparing the next generation of leaders for the rigors of school. But also that preparation programs are working in partnership with communities to support better, more inclusive schooling. And that's a role that preparation programs have really stepped into over the past few years. We're glad that you're joining today. The Center on Great Teachers and Leaders at American Institutes for Research, that's my organization, the University Council for Education Administration, and the Wallace Foundation launched this e-learning series to really highlight research and practices in principal preparation and explore the relationships between educator preparation programs within universities and other providers. The series is an outgrowth of the Wallace Foundation's University Principal Preparation Initiative, which is a $56 million investment in improving principal preparation, which is now in its third year. The series aims to share ideas and amplify our national dialogue on educator preparation. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Matthew Clifford, and I'm a principal researcher at American Institutes for Research in Chicago, where for the past 15 years I've studied school principals and leadership, both in their preparation, professional development, and evaluation. I'm a former teacher and systems administrator. If we can move on to the next slide. Just a little bit more about the five-part series. Today is our fourth in the series. April Peters-Hawkins is our presenter. There's one more session in the series which will occur on October 8th. We hope that you'll be able to join that series as well. What you can expect from each of the sessions in the series is a focus on practical tools and ways to improve principal preparation and the partnerships that support preparation programs. We want to focus on research, and practices. And so if you go to the Center on Education, the Center for Great Teachers and Leaders at American Institutes for Research, if you happen to miss one of the previous sessions, or you want to download some of the materials from the previous sessions or April's session today, all of that information is available to you at that website, which we will put into chat. Since we're all on Zoom, I know that we're experts in Zoom at this point, but just quickly, a few protocols need to be in place so that we all get the information that April's providing to us. So first of all, if you haven't done so, if you happen to have control of your own mic, please mute your mic. This really helps to minimize background ambient noise and will help with interruptions and help your colleagues to hear. Secondly, please use chat for two reasons. One, raise content-related questions. We want to hear from you, and I will be monitoring chat so that April can focus on her presentation. But if there's an opportunity for me to raise your questions or respond to you in chat, I will certainly do that. Secondly, please use chat if you're having some technical issues. We have a team of folks behind the scenes who are able to support you in working through some of those technical concerns. When you're using Zoom chat, it's important that you select the person or people who you want to receive the message. Oftentimes, the default in chat is to send a message to the presenter. You want to toggle that on if you're not going to email or chat with the presenter directly. So you'll want to say chat to all participants. That's an important thing that I learned, and so I'm passing that on to you. And then lastly, for those of you who are part of the Wallace Foundation University Principal Preparation Initiative post-presentation discussion, you should have received a link in your email to join that discussion session afterward. So we will be closing this presentation, and then you'll have to click the link to join the discussion session directly afterward. I'll put the link into chat at the end of the presentation and remind you just in case you're enthralled by the content. So without further ado, I'd like to just kind of briefly tell you a little bit about our speaker today. So April Peters-Hawkins is an associate professor and associate department chair at the Department of Education, Leadership, and Policy Studies at the University of Houston. It's been a joy to work with April in preparing this presentation, and I've learned a lot about her and her work. So I'm really glad that you're engaged with us today to learn from her. April comes to her work at the University of Houston with a wealth of prior knowledge. She has experience as a middle school teacher, school social worker, high school principal, and then a school improvement coach. Her research and her practice emphasizes the connection between school leadership and educational equity. Her recent work has highlighted the experiences and power of African American and Asian American school leaders as they work within urban school systems to bring about change. Today, April will talk about her work at the University of Houston and the Houston metropolitan area, specifically focused in on the educational partnerships that she's engaged in, the systems and tools that she and her colleagues have developed to support principal preparation and ensure that her program at the University of Houston remains vital and responsive. And at the same time, she and her colleagues are engaging with Houston area school districts to bring about social justice and create conditions for great leadership to occur. So without further ado, April.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak with all of you. And thank all of you who are out there in Zoom land for joining us today. It's indeed a pleasure. So Matt gave you an overview of my purpose in this presentation today. The title is Equipping and Sustaining Equity-Oriented School Leaders for Diverse Contexts, Some Tools and Takeaways. By no means are these tools or takeaways exhaustive, but I just want to be able to share with all of you some of the things that we've been engaged in at the University of Houston. And although I don't believe that my colleagues, any of them are on this webinar, I would like to thank them as well, because I'm a representation of our collective efforts. And so I would like to acknowledge them and their efforts in developing and sustaining the partnerships that we have with our district partners. The other thing I want to say before we dive right in is that for the purpose of this discussion, we're really discussing and examining equity at the 30,000-foot level. So what that means is that specific programs, specific university programs and district partners must engage in that work of defining equity and defining what an equity orientation means for themselves. And so my purpose is not to do that as much as to share the experiences that we've had with our district partners around the equity work that we've done in preparing aspiring leaders. So you'll hear me talk really generally in some ways and specifically about some tools that we've used. And then also I want to say that I'm focusing specifically on what we've done programmatically. And so there is obviously more work to do on the front end as we identify, recruit, and select folks to enter our programs. And certainly on the back end, I was in a very compelling conversation recently about how we know that folks are actually equity oriented after they leave our programs. I think that's enduring. It's an enduring question that we all must ask ourselves as programs and as partners. So I want to speak specifically about what happens sort of in the middle there for the purpose of this discussion. So let's go to the next slide. And so my background, as Matt mentioned, is as a practitioner. I was a teacher. I was a middle school teacher and dean of students at one point. And I was a high school principal, all in urban settings, all with in 2 different states and with different equity issues. But certainly those experiences really gave me an opportunity to think and reflect and engage around the equity work that I've come to love to do. And then I spent 10 years at the University of Georgia, also engaging with partners and things around equity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then with respect to doing this work explicitly from the university perspective, I've had 3 notable experiences in my professional career that I think really lend themselves to me thinking about this work. So first, as a member of the University of Georgia faculty, I participated with my colleagues and other colleagues around the state at different universities with the Gwinnett County Public Schools and their quality measures program. My participation was not significant in some spaces and not in others, but one of the things that was a takeaway for me was the power of the professional learning community. And what I mean by that is we were working with colleagues that on thinking about how we improve administrator and leader preparation. And these were colleagues that would ordinarily be considered competitors because they were from other institutions. And yet we were able to work together, to think together, and to revise and really make some programmatic changes in our respective institutions. Additionally, through the University Council of Educational Administration, the Program Design Network at the University of Houston, we engaged in one of the PDN NICs, which is a networked improvement community. That's what NIC stands for. And our focus was powerful learning experiences with an emphasis on equity. And so some of our tools I'll talk about harken back to that. And then finally, and I think most significantly for my own learning and experience, is our own district partnerships that we've developed at the University of Houston. So a little quick background there is that I arrived here in Houston about 5 years ago. This is the start of my 5th year. And at that time, a couple of colleagues and myself, excuse me, really went to work developing district partnerships. And without a real blueprint that we followed, but knowing that we were in the Houston metropolitan area, that we were in the second most diverse city in the country, and that the metropolitan area was equally diverse. And we wanted to make sure that we recruited students who we could prepare effectively, and that we engaged in partnerships that would be enduring, that we could sustain. So that's my background to this work. And so let's just jump right in. Let's go to the next slide. And when I thought about what I would say, to me, I think what's really important is the imperative for equity. And so I want to start sort of thinking just about things like a mission and vision, and then go to some of the other things that are very extant in our lived experiences day to day currently. So in our mission, in our department, we actually have a mission that is oriented toward justice and equity. And so we are driven by that, and it was collectively developed, and one of those things that we revisit and reflect upon on a regular basis. In my work at the University of Georgia, we hired a consultant, a very well-known academic who works at Vanderbilt University, who asked us, "What's your center of gravity?" And that always stuck with me as in terms of what is our passion, what is our compass for the work that we are doing. And I think that's really important. And finally, the imperative for all of this also comes from a conversation that I had over coffee with one of our superintendent partners. And he said, "What's the value add?" And I think all of these things really play together nicely in terms of thinking about what drives you, sort of what's your mission internally, right? What centers us, but then also externally to our partners, what's the value add to them, and how do we engage symbiotically in this work? Moreover, when we think about the complexity of the principalship, that has certainly shifted. And I'll talk a little bit about that in some of the data that I'd like to present to you. But that's really important for thinking about the imperative for being equity oriented. And then currently, we're asking principals to lead in really interesting, an interesting moment that is characterized in many ways by crisis, one way or another. And so I like to think about, or I have been thinking about this notion of a pandemic along three lines, really. And that is, there's a viral pandemic, right? That people are actually protecting their health, but there's also a racial pandemic that I believe has always existed, but the veil has been, for whatever reason, lifted. And I think part of that is because we're also simultaneously going through another pandemic. And then finally, there's the economic pandemic that goes along with all these three things. So they are operating in tandem. And all of this impacts what happens in schools. It impacts the work that we do at the university level to prepare leaders and teachers. And it also impacts what's happening in the schools where our aspiring leaders and teachers serve. And so we cannot ignore the impact of this very moment on the things that we need to be mindful of as we prepare leaders. So I was also thinking about just some of the data that exists in spite of this moment that also compels us toward an equity imperative, right? And so I'd like to run through a little bit of that briefly, and then share some of the tools that we've developed over the years and some takeaways that I have from this experience. So if we could go to the next slide. And what we see, you'll see that these slides, I'm going to apologize because some of this might be difficult to view in terms of the size of it. And so I apologize for that. But what this shows is student demographics. Much of the data that I will share with you comes from 2018 or 2017 in terms of the demographic data that's here. And what you can see, that first blue line on the graph represents white students. The next one represents Black students, then Hispanic students, then let me look on my screen so I can see. Then Asian students, Pacific Islander students, American Indian, and then two or more races. What I hope you take from that is that although the largest single group is white students, if you combine all the other groups of students of color, they outnumber in terms of numbers and percentages, the students that, they outnumber white students in our schools. And so what does that mean? That means our schools are overwhelmingly enrolling students of color. And so that brings with it all kinds of cultural capital, ethnic capital, social capital that may be different than the traditional mainstream ways of doing schooling. And so we need to be mindful of that. The next couple of slides I'd like to talk about have to do with now teacher and administrator demographics. So if we could go to the next slide. What you'll see here is teacher demographics, and also broken down by race and by gender. So in the left-hand slide, what you see is the teachers by race, and overwhelmingly the teachers are white. The next column there is black in orange, and the gray column represents Hispanic teachers. In the right-hand graph, what you see is overwhelmingly teachers are women. So the blue column is male teachers and the orange column is women teachers. So our teachers are overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly female. And so, that is as it is. However, I think what that compels us to do is to think about how there may be some cross-cultural opportunities for learning and growing as we prepare leaders. And what I'm curious about also, and I think this is a point for further consideration for me, is what our students who are aspiring leaders may look like. I think in Houston, we may be different just because of the nature of the diversity of our city. But in general, overwhelmingly, what does that look like? Who are we preparing to go and lead? I would think that these data support what these graphs show. And then the next graph is, if we can go to the next slide, is principal demographics. The reason I share teacher demographics is because the pipeline into the principalship starts with teachers. But if we look at principal demographics, it really looks quite similar to the demographics that I showed you with respect to teachers in the slide previous. And so again, overwhelmingly, our principals are white. The column in blue represents white, and then black principals are represented with the orange column, and then Hispanic with the gray. And then in the graph right next to it on the right, again, principals, maybe surprisingly, are overwhelmingly female as well. So the blue column represents male principals and the orange column represents women principals. And what we see again is that overwhelmingly our principals are white and they are women as well. And so again, the opportunities for cross-cultural learning and growing are really important. Now let's talk about some student data. So, and these are not exhaustive data points, right? There are lots of ways in which we can examine data, both with respect to who are the teachers in the school and who are the adults in the school, but also the children and what their experiences are. But the next slide speaks really to discipline. And I'm defining this exclusionary discipline piece as students being expelled, being excluded from the academic day. And so what we see is overwhelmingly Black students are being excluded from school based on discipline, both male and female, over any other group. Now there are other groups of concern here, and all of this should be of concern anywhere there's disproportionality. So if we look at the second from the right column, that represents our Indigenous students, and considering the population proportionality to the exclusionary discipline proportionality, that is concern. So these are moments of concern as well. And then the next slide, I wanted to do a little bit of a comparison, because frequently we speak about special education, but we don't necessarily hold that up against the data for gifted education. So I wanted to do that. And so in this slide, what we see is that overwhelmingly our, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make my slide bigger so I can see this as well. Our Indigenous students are overwhelmingly enrolled in special education, as are our Black students. So the Indigenous students are represented by the green column. Our Black students are represented by the orange column. Also of concern are students of 2 or more races, who are represented by the dark blue column. And of course, our Hispanic students, who are represented by the gray column. However, in gifted education, there is also over and underrepresentation as well. So our Asian students are by far represented very well in gifted education, and not so much the same for our Hispanic, Black, and Indigenous students. And so again, some opportunities to think about how we are preparing leaders to serve in these schools where we have such disproportionalities and opportunities for thinking about equity in a different way. So let's go to the next slide. So as I was preparing for this presentation, I started to think about what are some things that we have done in our space to really be thoughtful about our partnership and how we engage in an equity orientation together, and then also what we've done to sort of push our partners. So one of the things that's really important to this is a partner engagement for equity. I don't think that we can get this work done if we don't get it done in tandem with our partners. And that's an interesting thing, because partnership means more than just they send the aspiring leaders to us, we train them and send them back. It really means that we're in this together with our sleeves rolled up together. And so our partnerships have really resulted in mutual commitment to transparent communication, a mutual understanding of how we need to reflect and maybe make certain things better, how we also might engage adjuncts, which I'll speak to in a second. But with respect to pushing back, I mentioned earlier that one of our district partners, one of the superintendents, had asked us, what is the value add to one of our programs for their district? And it really got me to thinking. And in my response to him, I said, well, here are the things that we are doing to make sure that when folks leave us and go back and work in the district as leaders, they are bringing their best knowledge and selves to the job. And what was powerful about that conversation really was that we were talking specifically about the doctorate. Now, in most cases, we prepare people for the principalship at the master's level. And that's true in our program too, primarily. But we have a great number of students who are in the doctoral program who are also preparing for the principalship. And the superintendent was asking us, and what is the value add of all of this? And what we have been saying all along is that we encourage our students to focus on the intractable issues, the problems of practice that exist in their space. And then we try to empower students to become scholar practitioners in order to focus on those issues, and then to come up with solutions potentially for addressing those issues. And when I told him one of the assignments that we have students to do, which is truly a problem of practice, where they have to focus on the data within a community, where they have to think about and articulate what that issue is, both from a local perspective and a global perspective, a national perspective at least, he really had this light that came on, and he said, you know, we have this program that we're already doing where we're collecting data because we have concerns about some of our communities. This is a really diverse district in lots of ways, including the fact that there are some very wealthy components and areas of the district and others not so much. It's racially quite diverse and so linguistically very diverse, a very large district, upwards of 80,000 or more students in that district. And they were really, as a district, grappling with some of the challenges in different communities. And they wanted to be focused about their interventions in those communities and not be widespread or paint a broad brushstroke. And we were already encouraging students to actually go and find these issues. And so what we were able to do is to work together, to pair students based on their interests with some of the challenges that were being, that the district was seeking to address. So this was a way to have mutual accountability, to push each other, but also to push back at each other by asking what's the value add, and for us to say, what is the practical experience that students will get in addressing these issues? And so it's an ongoing conversation, it's an ongoing effort, but it really was an opportunity for us to think about how we engage together as partners. A second component of that is our engaging of adjuncts. So we have multiple partners with our program, and different partners have different processes for identifying adjuncts. But if I go back to this particular partner again, one of the things that they require is that the superintendent approve the adjuncts that who teach the classes that we've identified need an adjunct. And one of the things that we require is that they are considered to be effective instructional leaders in that district. And so, and the superintendent is also committed to that as well. When we do have adjuncts, we provide them, we train them. We provide them with training, but we also provide syllabi templates that have been where the standards that are being taught are identified, and we do that to ensure uniformity of equity focus. We do that to ensure uniformity of the critical standards projects, which I'll mention in the next slide. There is some agency for adjuncts to modify and tailor them based on district need and district interest. But we want to make sure that we are remaining committed to our equity-oriented focus that we've been very intentional about, and I'll speak about that on the next slide, in terms of the way in which we've thought through not only what our intentions are, as many of us are former leaders, district and school leaders, but also what is required by the state and national standards. So speaking of that, let's go to the next slide. So one of the first things that we did when most of us got here at Houston at the same time, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of continuity, but one of the great things that we did was sit down, look at the standards, and make an alignment to those standards, which we've been calling a standards crosswalk. So we have a very thick document that actually compares all of the different standards that students are asked to master across one another, and then we use those as we develop our classes. So the crosswalk was of the national PSEL standards, the Texas Principal Certificate standards, and the Texas 268 exam assessment. So because students will be taking the principal exam, we wanted to make sure that the domains that are assessed on that exam were crosswalked across the standards. And so we had this alignment that we did, and then we further aligned those to our courses. So that was applied to each course, and as a result, a critical standards project became the culminating assessment for each course. So each course has a different one, but they all have one. And that's so that they're mapped to the standards, and that they are mapped to the content and the skills and the dispositions that aspiring leaders need to have. They're also addressed in each and indicated in each syllabus. And what's really important about that is that we integrated our equity orientation across the coursework. And that's something that's, based in research. We got that information or that idea because of the research. But we wanted to make sure that our mission is evidenced in our commitment to equity in general, but through our courses, right? So all of our master's courses, which is, as I mentioned, where we primarily teach aspiring and train aspiring principals, all of our master's classes have an intentionality concerning equity, and that's evidenced in the course description. It's evidenced in the critical standards project. It's evidenced in the linkage to those standards that have been crosswalked. And that is all something that is in the student's hand and made obvious to them throughout the course. We also create bridges between theory and practice. So those critical standards projects are not just aligned to the standards, but they are also they also require students to both research and practice. And that's born out of a lexicon and an ideology in which we acknowledge the students as scholar practitioners, that they are engaged in a focus on the intractable issues that exist in their spaces, that they are working collaboratively with other leaders and other folks in that space, but that those projects really do have meaning and value for the folks who serve in that space and the students that are served in that space. We also did, in order to connect theory and practice, we embed internship hours in the program of study. So all of the certification programs require some sort of practicum or internship. And we were finding that it was very difficult for students to get meaningful experiences just in having those hours that they had to do. They were just checking boxes. And so we started thinking about, as we're building these courses with an equity focus, how do we make sure that students are getting what they need? So many of the critical standards projects and other assignments are also the kinds of things that can be performance-based and learning activities that map back to some of the requirements of their internship hours. Am I low on time? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, April. On the issue of adjuncts, I know that I'm paying attention to the chat. So one of the questions that came up about adjuncts is just like, do you have some performance-based indicators of excellence or some sort of way of looking at adjuncts contributions to the preparation program? And if you do, maybe you could share those
Mhm.
with us so that we can get that back to Corey Stone Johnson, who raised the question.
Sure. So we are, this is a really good question and one that we've begun to grapple with. So we aren't super sophisticated in how we do this yet, but we are doing two things. At the end of a course, the course, students do complete a course evaluation. Most times, in my experience, those for adjuncts, those are never seen again. Before we assign adjuncts, we review those course evaluations. So even if that adjunct has been referred to us by the district and even by the superintendent, if those course evaluations are consistently not good or in any way are red flag to us, we don't rehire that adjunct. We also do adjunct training on the front end. So every year, adjuncts, even if they've been with us, are required, we have developed a handbook and everything, they're required to complete that training so that they understand our expectations, how we've crosswalked the standards, all of those kinds of things, our equity orientation and focus. Finally, what we started doing this year, and it got shut down by Corona, is the full-time faculty started observing in the adjuncts classes. It's been a powerful tool because we've learned some things because our adjuncts are full-time practitioners. And so we've been able to sort of say, hey, these are some wonderful things that are going on. But it's a way, it's non-evaluative in one sense, but in another way, we're able to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in our classes with our adjuncts. That's a great question, so thank you for asking that. The last thing that I'll say about this particular tool, which is the program commitment to equity, is that we have job embedded internships and residency programs. So this is a challenge for most folks to figure out how to make the internships have some teeth. We still have spaces where we need to figure that out. So some of our partners provide release time for the internship program. One of our partners that we just joined with this year, they will specifically be doing that because there was a state education agency grant that allows for that. And we find that that's very meaningful. That district is a new partner district for us and has different equity issues than what our typical partners have as equity issues. But what's really wonderful for their folks who are aspiring leaders is they actually get the release time to go and do some of the job embedded training. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The final category of tools for us is the powerful learning experiences. If you remember at the beginning of this, I mentioned that I was part of, the University of Houston has been part of a PD and NIC that focused on powerful learning experiences for equity. And a number of things that we've done have, I think, lent themselves to thinking about this and continuing to think about this because we continue to learn and grow as we do this work. I want to quote Brown from 2006, who says, "Of the exploration of new understandings, the synthesis of new information, the integration of these insights throughout personal and professional spheres can lead future educational leaders to a broader, more inclusive approach in addressing issues of student learning and equity." And so we use some of these experiences as a way to engage students in developing an equity orientation. So a couple of things that we've done. When we first started this process, we realized that our students weren't really socialized to each other or to the way we do things. So in addition to the cohorts that aid with socialization, and many people do that, we started doing Saturday seminars. And we do the Saturday seminars with a lot of different, with a number of different goals. But related to this conversation, the Saturday seminars have provided a space for us to really dig deeper into and share with students our philosophies, our expectations, and give them some exposure to even deeper equity conversations. So 3 that come to mind that we've done. In each of these, we did a couple things. 1, we brought the students together for large and small group conversations. We purchased the book of the scholar who we were bringing to campus, and then we brought that scholar to campus in order to talk and work with our students. In some cases, those conversations have extended with the scholar past the moment that we had them there. So we had Muhammad Khalifa, who came and spoke about culturally responsive leadership. We had Catherine Bell McKenzie, who came and spoke about school and community equity audits, and I'll speak a little bit more about what she did in a second. And we had Rich Milner, who came and spoke about diversity and opportunity gaps. All of these were timely because of the kinds of issues and challenges and strengths that our students face in their schools. I have to say that the Saturday seminars are for first-year students. But we do invite all of the students to come to the presentations, but the first-year students are the ones who are the focus because they haven't had that engagement with us. With respect to the school and community equity audits, Catherine Bell McKenzie gave our students a little bit of homework before they even got there. And so they had to really think about and create a video of their community, the strengths and challenges of the school community before they even got to class. And then she was able to kind of work with them in that seminar to think about that. And the students are cohorted. So within a cohort, the students worked in groups to develop these videos. The conversation was so rich pre, during, and post for students to really think differently about what they had already assumed all along about their community. So it was a real opportunity to engage with their sleeves rolled up in this work. Some other things that we've done with respect to powerful learning experiences, in many of our classes, we require students to do some level of an equity audit. That's based on the research of Linda Skurla and her colleagues. And so in some classes, the students are asked to do equity audits of the programs in the schools or the district where they serve. In others, they're asked to do curriculum equity audit where they're specifically focused on the curriculum. And so this is how we've been able to connect our expectations that we've articulated at the 30,000 foot level, specifically with respect to our mission and our center of gravity, with course expectations and leadership standard expectations and the value add that superintendent continued to remind us that we need to be making sure of. Other learning experiences that we've created for students is critical autobiography with self-reflection. One of the things that we've learned from the research on increasing equity orientation in what we do to prepare leaders is that we have to start with the self. And for students to really not only just sort of write a racial or critical, or rather racial or some other sort of biography of their experiences, but to have some critical element to that and some self-reflection to that. So they're able to think about themselves and then think past themselves. We also, as I've mentioned several times, have required students, we require them in several classes to engage in a problem of practice activity. And that's at both the doctoral and the master's level. And of course, I've mentioned the performance-based course embedded preparation certification activities that students have been required to do as well. And again, we map those to the standards. And in every course, particularly at the master's level, we are explicit about the fact that in our description of the equity orientation that course has. Okay, next slide. Oh, now there's a poll. So we can launch the poll, but the question that I am interested in hearing from people is which activities focused on engaging and sustaining equity are most needed in your organization or with your partners? And so there are a few choices there. So please indulge us and do this quick poll. Okay, so the results, fairly balanced. Engaging partners around a common equity mission, that's a real challenge. And different partners are going to potentially have different equity missions. So you may have, you may find yourselves in different directions with different partners. The in-house programmatic commitment to equity behind the scenes, and then collaboratively developing This one actually got the most votes, collaboratively developing powerful learning experiences for students. Also a challenge. The one thing I'll say there is, when we developed these critical standards projects, we had to go back and revamp them because they weren't all powerful learning experiences at the time. So it's one of those things that we continue to engage and reflect and talk about and workshop together as a program. I suspect we'll be doing that again, particularly in light of some of the new challenges, that schools are now facing that we haven't had to think about before in terms of virtual education, the pandemic, et cetera. And so how do we get to that? So thank you for participating in that poll. I'm going to conclude here with just giving a few takeaways. So if we could go to the takeaways slide. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So a few things that we've learned in this process, and it's an ongoing learning process as well. To plan for continuity. Sustainability is a challenge. We've, folks come and go in districts and in universities. And so what we've learned is that we can't have sort of the one person who's the point person for the partnerships, but really thinking about how we plan deeply for the work that we want to do and how that work survives even the changes of personnel. To communicate transparently and honestly. Obviously, that's necessary, to have those courageous conversations about what the equity issues are, but also to push at each other one way or another. And we have different kinds of relationships with different partners, but we've been able to have some really interesting, honest conversations both ways. And we've opened that door and been very frank about that. And I think that's what enables the partnerships to grow. One of the other things that we've learned is that in different partners, commitments to equity may either be nascent or it may look different than, we may be gung-ho and the district is more politically correct about certain things. And so we have to be thoughtful about that as well. Matt, I see you again. Oh, okay. I'm always wondering, am I over time? District and university goals may or may not be aligned. So that's really important to start goal setting together. And we learned that as well. Continuous learning activities need to be implemented. So both formal and informal, right? We need to learn from one another and we need to make sure that we continue to do that. The embedded learning is significant in terms of equipping aspiring leaders. And so that was one of the things that we had changed. We changed the order of classes, we changed the content of classes, we changed some of the classes themselves, and then we changed the substance of classes as we needed to. We also thought about who teaches the classes and where we need a full-time faculty member who's very much connected and tethered to this work, where we need an adjunct that we can connect and tether to this work, etc. The last slide. Please. And so final takeaways, to embed powerful learning experiences and support into the program of study and through internships, mentorships, etc. This was a significant means of equipping aspiring leaders. And what's so rewarding, just as a teacher, right? Because at the heart of it, professors are still teachers, is when someone says, my life has been changed by this experience. I was so resistant to it. I didn't want to see these things. And then my eyes have been opened. And so we get some of those experiences from teachers and we from our aspiring leaders. And we love that because we are inspired that they will go back into their schools and do things a little bit differently. Like I mentioned, some of our partners have committed to providing release time, and we realize that's really organic. And then diversity of context. The challenge is making sure that folks, when they're in these internship programs, can actually be in different spaces. So if the district is diverse enough that they could do internship hours at an elementary school, at a middle school, at a high school, at an urban space, in a rural space. If the district, in Houston, there's big old wide spaces where there's chicken farms and then there's Houston. So on all that's within 50 miles of each other. And then embedding powerful teaching via our adjuncts. So we train them, we communicate with them, we evaluate them, and we take the data that we get from students and we make decisions about that. And then acknowledge and to the extent possible, address economic and other realities. So we don't engage with our partners in exactly the same way. And one of our partners, we negotiated to do a fee discount, and we had to sort of renegotiate the MOU in certain ways. And of course, with many of our universities and the financially overflowing spaces that they are right now, and I'm joking, we may have to do some other renegotiation, particularly around some of our economic realities. So these are the things that we've learned, and some of the things that we've done. I hope that they've been beneficial to you and have sparked some thinking in you. And if these are things that you're doing, maybe they've affirmed for you some of the work, the good work that's already being done. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, April. There have been, chat has been extremely active throughout this period. And I'm sorry that we haven't had a chance to get to all of the questions. So if we can move to the next slide, this is also the invitation slide, or the next slide after this, actually. There we go. So we understand that webinars are great for disseminating information to over 100 people really quickly. And I think April has been fantastic in sharing the University of Houston story and her own personal story as she's continuing to move into this work. I would say that if your question hasn't been addressed, please follow up with us. There's two ways to do that. One is send me or send April an email. I know that I am very happy to talk about any of the issues that she's raised, and we may be able to talk with you, particularly if there's tools or approaches that you're interested in learning more about. We'd be happy to share. And then secondly, for those who are able to join the UPPI discussion session directly after this meeting, this is an opportunity to get your questions answered, because April is going to join us in that session, and we'll have an opportunity to pick her brain and unpack some of the many ideas that she shared with us today. If you are able to join that discussion session, there is a link in chat, and you should have received an email for that discussion session directly afterward. So please go ahead and at the end of this, close this session and click on that link, and you'll open the next session. Secondly, we really want to hear from you. We rely on you to give us feedback about the session. We want to hear about the content, because we're interested in continuing to support the e-learning series and continuing to support this dialogue within the field. So your feedback about the session, its format, or anything else you'd like to share will help us to build something that's responsive to your interests and needs. And then finally, thank you I know I speak for April on this, but thank you very much for joining today. We had well over 100 participants. Many of them, the majority of you are from universities. And so it's truly, as the school year is starting and everything that is occurring with the startup of school, it's really a kind of a testament to your interest and dedication in continuing to learn, even in these challenging times. So we appreciate that. We hope that this is the start of a conversation, and please do follow up with us. Thanks for joining today. Bye-bye.